5 signals that reveal a covert narcissist in conversation. There are conversations that end cleanly. You say goodbye, you move on, and the interaction dissolves without residue. And then there are conversations that linger. You walk away feeling uneasy, but not angry, confused, but not able to explain why. Nothing overtly hostile occurred, no argument, no raised voice, and yet something inside you tightens, as if a subtle line was crossed that you can't quite point to. That quiet discomfort is often the first signal. When you leave an interaction doubting yourself, feeling emotionally depleted, or replaying the conversation again and again in your mind, trying to decode tone, intention, or meaning, you may not be dealing with ordinary miscommunication. You may be encountering a covert narcissist. Covert narcissism rarely announces itself. It doesn't arrive with dominance or grandiosity. Instead, it moves through conversations softly, indirectly, often cloaked in vulnerability, humility, or emotional need. That's what makes it so difficult to identify and so psychologically draining. But once you know what to listen for, the patterns become unmistakable. In this breakdown, you'll learn 5 conversational signals that consistently appear when you're dealing with covert narcissism. These signals aren't about diagnosing someone. They're about protecting your clarity, your energy, and your sense of self, especially if you are an empathetic, reflective, or emotionally attuned person. We begin with the most common entry point. Signal 1. The conversation quietly revolves around their suffering. Have you ever left a conversation feeling exhausted, even though all you really did was listen and reassure? Not because something dramatic was shared, but because the interaction seemed to pull from you without ever giving back. This is often the first signal, a subtle but persistent gravitational pull toward their hardship. When you speak with a covert narcissist, the conversation repeatedly circles their struggles, disappointments, or injustices. Their stories are framed in a way that positions them as misunderstood, mistreated, or unfairly burdened by life. On the surface, it looks like vulnerability. Underneath, it's something else. The vulnerability is selective. Their language isn't oriented toward insight or growth. It's designed to evoke sympathy, to draw emotional attention, to quietly assign you a role: listener, comforter, rescuer. Everyone complains sometimes. Everyone needs support during hard seasons. The difference lies in how the story is told. A person seeking resolution might say, "I'm struggling to find work, and I'm trying to figure out my next step." A covert narcissist is more likely to say, "I was pushed out, treated unfairly, and now I don't know how I'm supposed to survive." The framing matters. There's a subtle but consistent positioning of themselves as powerless, paired with an unspoken expectation that you will fill the gap, offer reassurance, offer solutions, offer emotional labor. And if you're empathetic, this works exceptionally well. Because when someone shares hardship, your instinct is to soften, to care, to lean in. You don't interrogate the narrative, you respond to the emotion. That natural empathy becomes the access point. Over time, you may notice a pattern. The more support you give, the less empowered they become. Every solution is met with resistance. Every suggestion is quietly dismissed. Not aggressively, but persistently. In professional settings, I've learned to pay close attention to people who passionately argue for their own limitations. They ask for help, but immediately list all the reasons help won't work. They want understanding, but push back against every path forward. This doesn't automatically mean narcissism, but it is a signal to slow down. Because when hardship becomes identity and helplessness becomes currency, the conversation stops being mutual. The seamless share test. If you sense that a conversation is quietly centered on extracting sympathy, there's a simple way to assess whether you're in a reciprocal dynamic or a one-sided one. Without announcing it, gently weave your own related experience into the conversation. For example, "That sounds incredibly stressful. I went through something similar a few years ago, and what helped me was..." You're not redirecting, you're checking for balance. In healthy conversations, this creates connection. The other person listens, asks questions, or reflects on similarities. There's a sense of exchange. With covert narcissism, something different happens. They may interrupt, or briefly acknowledge your experience before immediately pivoting back to themselves. Or ignore what you shared entirely, continuing their narrative as if you never spoke. That lack of curiosity is not accidental. Covert narcissists are often uninterested in your inner world unless it serves their needs. Your experiences don't register as equally important, only as tools or distractions. When you notice this pattern, disengagement doesn't require confrontation. A calm, contained exit is enough. "It sounds like you're dealing with a lot right now. I hope things ease up for you." You don't need to stay emotionally available to someone who isn't meeting you halfway. Signal 2. Subtle jabs hidden inside casual remarks. Have you ever replayed a comment someone made, not because it was obviously cruel, but because it felt faintly sharp? Almost like a quiet sting embedded inside a joke, a comment, or an observation? This is the second signal. Passive aggression delivered under the cover of innocence. Covert narcissists often undermine others indirectly. Their comments may sound harmless on the surface, sarcastic, observational, even caring. But underneath, there's a diminishment happening. They may make subtle remarks about someone's competence, lifestyle, sensitivity, or boundaries, then frame it as humor, concern, or just being honest. For example, they might comment on someone's work ethic, suggesting they're lazy or naive, while insisting they're only worried about them. Or they'll make a backhanded compliment that leaves you unsure whether you were praised or insulted. This isn't accidental language. It's a strategy that allows them to elevate themselves without appearing openly hostile. If challenged, they can retreat behind plausible deniability. "You're overreacting. I was joking. You're too sensitive." Empathetic people often miss this signal because they're wired to assume good intent. You give people the benefit of the doubt. You interpret generously. You smooth over discomfort rather than interrogate it. I once felt uneasy eating out with unfamiliar people because of food allergies. Most responded with understanding, but one person loudly remarked, "Oh, you're one of those people who needs special treatment." At the time, I laughed politely. I told myself it was just awkward humor. Years later, after repeated interactions, the pattern was undeniable. The sarcasm wasn't accidental. It was a way to assert superiority by minimizing a legitimate need. Covert narcissism often shows up this way, not through overt attacks, but through small, deniable degradations. The clarify and observe method. When you're unsure whether a comment was careless or calculated, pause the moment gently. "I'm curious, what did you mean by that?" This single question does two important things. First, it gives the other person space to clarify. If the comment truly was a misstep, most people will soften immediately. They'll explain, apologize, or express concern about how it landed. Second, it removes their cover. If you're dealing with a covert narcissist, the response often reveals itself quickly. They may double down on sarcasm, mock your sensitivity, deflect, or subtly reposition themselves as the victim, suggesting you're the one creating tension. The key isn't the original remark. It's their response to being asked to reflect. That's where intention surfaces. Signal 3. You're quietly pulled into the rescuer role. Have you ever noticed a sudden internal shift during a conversation where you go from listening to feeling responsible? As if their emotional state, their outcome, or their stability has somehow become your job? This is the third signal, the savior dynamic. Covert narcissists are particularly skilled at creating this pull. Through carefully framed stories and selective vulnerability, they position you as uniquely capable of understanding or helping them. Not overtly, but subtly. You begin to feel needed, important, essential. And that feeling can be intoxicating, especially if you're someone who values compassion and usefulness. It taps directly into your desire to matter. But the cost is high, because the help is rarely reciprocal. Your effort is rarely acknowledged, and no matter how much support you give, the need doesn't resolve, it expands. What makes this signal difficult to detect is that it doesn't live in their words alone. It shows up in your internal experience. For me, the red flag is the moment I feel a quiet urgency to fix someone, to take responsibility for their emotional outcome. That sensation tells me to pause. It doesn't automatically mean narcissism, but it does mean a boundary is being tested. And if that sense of responsibility is paired with pity, if I start feeling both sorry for them and obligated to save them, I know I'm stepping into an old, unhealthy pattern. Reflect, ask, observe. When you feel the savior pull, slow the moment down. First, reflect inwardly. Ask yourself whether your desire to help is coming from mutual care or from pressure. Then, gently return responsibility to where it belongs by asking, "How can I support you right now?" This question does something important. It reveals intent. In healthy dynamics, people respond with clarity and appreciation. They make reasonable requests. They respect your limits. In covert narcissistic dynamics, the answer is often vague, or it escalates, or it triggers guilt, or it leads to more dramatic storytelling without resolution. That response tells you everything you need to know. By the time these patterns start to feel familiar, something important has already shifted inside you. You're no longer just listening, you're monitoring. You're choosing words carefully. You're adjusting your tone, your reactions, even your silence. Not because you want to, but because something in the dynamic has taught you that certain responses carry consequences. This is where the later signals of covert narcissism become especially destabilizing. They don't announce themselves loudly. They erode clarity slowly, shaping your behavior while remaining just deniable enough to avoid confrontation. Signal 4. Being valued and devalued at the same time. Have you ever noticed someone praising you for a quality and then almost immediately criticizing you for that exact same trait? This is one of the most confusing signals to recognize because it doesn't feel openly hostile. In fact, it often begins with admiration. They may compliment your work ethic, your intelligence, your generosity, or your independence. In that moment, you feel seen, appreciated, drawn closer. And then, without pause, the tone shifts. Suddenly, that same work ethic becomes an accusation. You're always working. That independence becomes a flaw. You don't really need anyone. That generosity becomes an expectation. You should be doing more. This contradictory valuation keeps you emotionally off balance. You're left trying to reconcile two opposing messages at once. I'm admired, and I'm not enough. And that internal conflict benefits them. When approval becomes inconsistent, you naturally work harder to earn it. You try to emphasize the praised traits while minimizing whatever triggered criticism. Without realizing it, you start shaping yourself to fit an ever-shifting standard. Covert narcissists rely on this instability. It keeps you engaged, uncertain, and seeking alignment, while they quietly benefit from your effort, resources, or emotional availability. Empathetic people often miss this signal because they focus on the positive. When someone expresses admiration, we hold on to it. We tell ourselves the criticism must be situational or stress-related or misunderstood. We excuse what doesn't fit because we want the connection to make sense. I once experienced this dynamic with someone who frequently struggled professionally. They would praise my work and ask for support, introductions, referrals, opportunities. At the same time, they criticized me for not being available enough emotionally, framing it as a lack of care. I was valued for what I could provide and devalued for having limits. No matter what I did, the bar moved. That's not coincidence. That's structure. The priority clarification test. When you notice someone oscillating between admiration and criticism, gently interrupt the pattern. Ask which matters more to them, the quality they appreciated or the one they condemned. Most people will pause and reflect. They'll clarify, recalibrate, or express genuine curiosity about your perspective. A covert narcissist often reacts differently. They may dodge the question. They may become defensive. They may flip the focus back onto you, questioning your motives, your tone, or your sensitivity. That reaction signals discomfort with being seen clearly, because clarity threatens the dynamic. Signal 5. Disproportionate sensitivity to even mild disagreement. The final signal often appears quietly, but its impact is profound. Have you ever noticed someone withdrawing, shutting down, or punishing you emotionally over something that seemed minor? Not an insult, not an attack, just a difference in perspective, or a response that didn't fully validate them. Covert narcissists tend to interpret interactions in extremes. In their internal framework, you're either fully supportive or you're a threat. This means even neutral responses can be experienced as criticism. If you offer encouragement instead of pity, if you suggest resilience instead of sympathy, if you fail to react with the depth of validation they expect, they may retreat. Unlike overt narcissists, who often respond with visible anger, covert narcissists punish through withdrawal, silence, emotional absence, stonewalling. The message is subtle but clear. You made me feel unsafe. Now you lose access. Empathetic people are especially vulnerable here. You sense the shift immediately, the coldness, the distance, and without conscious intention, you begin to adapt. You avoid certain topics. You soften your opinions. You agree outwardly while disagreeing inwardly. Not because you've changed your values, but because you've learned the cost of honesty. I once did this instinctively in a long-term relationship. I learned which subjects triggered withdrawal and which responses restored calm. Over time, self-expression narrowed to whatever preserved peace. Then came a moment that revealed the depth of the dynamic. When my partner received a promotion at work, I congratulated them sincerely. I thought I was celebrating progress. What I didn't realize was that this contradicted their internal narrative of being oppressed and undervalued. They left the house without explanation. Hours passed, then days. No messages, no clarity. When they returned, distant and emotionally closed, they said quietly, "I'm not built like you. I can't handle this kind of pressure." Shortly after, they resigned from the position, and somehow, I was left managing the emotional fallout, confused, anxious, searching for what I had done wrong. That's the depth of covert manipulation. Even positive events can become threats, because anything that disrupts the victim identity destabilizes their sense of control. The direct inquiry method. If you find yourself being punished with silence or emotional withdrawal, resist the urge to guess or self-blame. Instead, initiate clarity. It feels like something shifted between us. Can we talk about what's going on? This approach is calm, non-confrontational, and direct. In healthy dynamics, this opens dialogue. The other person may share discomfort, clarify feelings, or work toward resolution. With covert narcissism, the response is different. They may deflect, they may minimize, they may remain silent, or they may subtly twist the conversation until you're apologizing, without ever addressing the original issue. Silence in this context isn't emotional regulation, it's leverage. Why these signals matter? None of these signals alone confirm narcissism. People are complex. Context matters. But when these patterns appear together, repeatedly, consistently, and at your expense, they tell a coherent story. A story where your empathy is recruited, your clarity is eroded, and your boundaries are quietly tested. The goal isn't to label others. The goal is to notice how you feel. Confused, drained, self-doubting, carefully calibrated. Those internal experiences are data. And once you recognize these conversational signals, you stop participating unconsciously. You regain choice. You step out of roles you never agreed to play. Because awareness isn't about control, it's about freedom. And now that you know what covert narcissists say, the next step is recognizing what they do. The behavioral patterns that surface early, often before words ever reveal intent. That's where real protection begins.